Okay, we have our attendees starting to join us. Good afternoon, everyone. We will we'll wait for a few minutes, for 2 or 3 minutes, just to make sure that we've got everyone that's waiting to join before we start. So so while we're waiting to start, yes, so thank you very much for attending this webinar today, brought to you by SWForum, which you'll hear more about in a moment. So I am David Wallen from the University of Oxford, and I'll be leading through this webinar today to avoid hearing my voice a bit too much. I'm intending to break this webinar up into easily digestible sections, which we can then have brief Q&As at the end of each, so that we can really get some understanding at each of the different sections that I'm going to be talking about. So as it's only 2:01, then we'll wait for, as I said, a couple of minutes till sort of 3 or 4 minutes pass before we actually begin. I notice a couple of people from SWForum in the attendees. So good afternoon. I hope the weather is nicer where you are than it has been here. So not been a spectacularly good beginning to summer, but hopefully it'll improve. So for a brief bit of trivia while we're beginning, just to pass a little bit of time, you may notice my background, which is a weather map previously from the BBC from the 1980s. This was actually the weather map presented before the 1987 hurricane, which struck the UK, which the weather presenter stood in front and said that in answer to a viewer's question, that Mrs. Smith, there will absolutely not be a hurricane. That evening, there then proceeded to be 120-mile-an-hour winds, and many thousands of trees were lost within the south of England. Right, I think we're getting ready. I'll just got a few people in chat. Okay, right. Well, good afternoon, everyone. And welcome to the first of the webinars hosted by SWForum.eu. This webinar is improving exploitation of project outcomes using market and technology readiness levels. So, as I said, I've broken up this proposed to be hour-long session into 4 easily digestible sections. The first 10 minutes or so is going to be an introduction to the SWForum.eu project and the aims of this webinar. We're then going to talk about what is a market and technology readiness level, and particularly what's a market and technology readiness level analysis. I'm then going to talk through how to complete an MTRL, which I'll try assessment, and then finally, how do we actually visualize these results? At the end of each of these sections is going to be a brief Q&A. So I would ask those that are attending during the rest of the webinar that if there are any questions, to either during the webinar to put them in the chat, wait for the end, but whilst generally talking, if you could keep yourselves muted, it would be appreciated. Okay, so on to section 1, the introduction to SWForum.eu and the aims of this webinar. I'm going to quickly go over the project itself, then actually MTRL within Software Forum, where does it feature? Why does it feature? A little bit of background into its development. What is it and why do we use it? So Software Forum is a new support action as funded through Horizon 2020 project, through the Horizon 2020 program. And it's aiming to create a sustainable online forum to actually support the development of the European open source software activities. We're aiming to support projects in the area, software, digital infrastructure, and cybersecurity. It's about multidisciplinarity, it's about exploitation, and it's really about building this European research roadmap for software. Because software is, of course, one of the key areas in which we can enhance European competitiveness within research and innovation. And, from that point of view, having the support action, which Software Forum is able to provide, be able to provide tools and services to actually increase visibility, increase competitiveness, is incredibly important for our research and innovation projects. The other key point, of course, from this is around increasing opportunities for exploitation and technology transfer. Research and innovation projects are, by their very nature, intended long-term to boost productivity in terms of commercial exploitation, and we would hope eventually in generating income for those countries that help actually provide support for the Horizon 2020 program. But what are the key objectives for SWForum.eu? The first one, of course, is to create a self-sustainable forum. So in many ways, to give a place where people that are engaged in the development of software within research and innovation actions, but also more generally building on that towards national and regional funded activities, where they can come together as a community to create discourse, create a knowledge about best practice. As part of that, of course, is this idea of cross-fertilization. Can we actually get ideas and strategies from one particular community and show that the improvements that they've brought from that community can be equally applicable elsewhere? Can we create best practice from software projects in a particular area, for example, machine learning, and can that be applied elsewhere, for example, in computer graphics or similar? As part of this, of course, we will also coordinate through connections with the specific projects in the calls that we're supporting to actually help create and provide input into European research roadmaps in the area of software. It's incredibly important that the voice of the community is heard within these areas, and that the guidance for creation of new calls and those projects that are supported that have some visibility both within the funders but also within the communities as a whole. And as part of that, we've created or going to be creating a number of specific tools and technologies that we have to enhance the visibility of EU projects. Often, unfortunately, it's said that, in many ways, and particularly with previous European scale funding initiatives, that the outcomes from European funded projects were reports that sat on shelves. Horizon 2020 has improved this by there not only being reports being the outcomes from projects, but we need to make sure that those outcomes of all different types, be they software, be they reports, be they communications, we need to make sure they're visible both to other European projects of which they may be relevant, but also to areas of business and exploitation from within that are able to make best use of what's developed. And the key one behind all four of these previous objectives, of course, is this idea about strengthening European competitiveness. We've seen that we need to raise the number of unicorn type industry businesses that are created, and software is a key area in which this can be done. We want to build competitiveness. We want to show that Europe is a place where cutting edge research projects, cutting edge development activities occur. And so we need to support that as much as possible. So what are we trying to do with this idea of these coordination and support measures within the projects? Well, the first activity, of course, is this idea of mapping, cross-fertilization and synergizing. So mapping where there is excellence, mapping and then ensuring there's cross-fertilization from those areas of excellence into other domains, making sure that we are able to raise the entire fleet, as it were, of activities with high quality knowledge and best practice. To do that, we have a number of different services. So we are developing our project radar, which is intended to display in a simple and easy to understand manner where particular products, projects and outcomes are within the development cycle. We're going to be creating a hub of mini project sites, so small scale web communication sites within the Software Forum website, where individual projects can promote themselves within a body of other relevant activities. And then, of course, our cross-fertilization workshops, events which are intended to bring together the community as a whole, so that we can actually ensure that those areas of best practice, those areas of knowledge sharing can occur in a relevant environment to the projects that are participating. We're aiming with this, to actually think about the idea then of road mapping. So can we actually understand, if we have a map of where we are, where do we want to get to? And from this point of view, this is about establishing an understanding of governance structures, a program where we can actually support projects with expertise from within Software Forum, an understanding also about how they might need, if they're going to be creating exploitable products, to think about the business model that needs to be done to support these projects as a whole. And then, of course, we need to engage with not only the projects that we're directly supporting, but those communities and bodies which might actually utilize the outputs from these projects. We need a communication strategy. We've got a web and social media presence, and we host a set of discussion forums. And finally, we have what we're going to be talking about today, our MTRL training. So from that point of view, let's think about and discuss exactly what the MTRL training, actually how that fits into Software Forum as a whole. Our fourth objective, of course, was around providing guidance for increasing the competitiveness of European initiatives by the definition of a methodological approach to actually measure the preparedness of individual projects or products for launching into market. And from that, we've created the MTRL, the Market and Technology Readiness Level. What we want to do here as part of this supports mentoring, technology transfer, and best practice guidance in this particular area. Whether we can have this from the point of view of policy practice is incredibly important. So the key outcome from this is going to be our MTRL framework. This is going to be specifically customized towards the requirements of software products and services. Because, of course, where we have developed this in the past and as a tool and service, and I'll talk about that in a moment, software engineering, digital infrastructures, and cybersecurity are specifically complex problem domains. And we need to make sure that what we're trying to offer as solutions, as information, as tools and services is correctly tuned to what those particular domains require. We're going to be supporting projects to perform self-assessment of their readiness under the MTRL framework, and I'm going to be talking about that later. And we're hosting this set of webinars, of which this is the first one. So where has MTRL come from? Well, MTRL was actually developed through a previous support action project, particularly in the area of cloud computing, through a project called CloudWatch and CloudWatch 2. As part of this was generally developed initially to the point where it was focused very specifically on cloud computing projects, but it could be launched as a domain, as a tool for use in other areas. And we used it in the next support action that we participated in and are still participating, cyberwatching.eu, the European Watch on Cybersecurity and Privacy. We tuned the MTRL assessment to actually participate in that project, to support projects in that area. And we will again then be tuning it and learning from these two previous activities where we've used MTRL to enhance its availability for projects within the software, digital infrastructures and cybersecurity areas that we're going to be supporting with SWForum. So what is MTRL? So the Market and Technology Readiness Level is an analytical methodology that we actually use to evaluate how close a particular project or product outputs are to being able to launch into market. It's given as a numerical value, and it is a combination of TRL, or Technological Readiness Level, so you'll know about quite a lot, and I'll talk about a bit in a moment in greater detail. And we combine that with something called Market Readiness Level. And the aim here is actually really understanding the commercial readiness of a particular product, tool, or technology for the market. And that's a very different thing from how technologically ready a particular product or service is. So why is an MTRL assessment useful for your project or product? Well, the first one, of course, by its very nature, is it assesses the current state of your project. It allows the project to actually think about itself and give an introspective analysis using a number of different specific criteria to view that current state of where they are in a particular roadmap towards possible market launch of an output. Because it is a point-in-time assessment, and at a fairly detailed point-in-time assessment, it allows the identification of possible weaknesses in the roadmap for a particular activity, and allows the project to take a step back with some objective analysis to say what can be the possible next steps. And for me, that's incredibly important. And then finally, of course, it facilitates interconnection between funded projects, because as you'll see later on, when we come to actual visibility, when we come to actually view the outputs from an MTRL analysis, we can actually visualize them in comparison with other products and services in that particular domain. So who should use MTRL? Well, project leaders are the obvious ones to understand where their particular project is within its roadmap towards output. Product managers, those within larger projects who are actually charged with taking a product to market, making sure that they understand where are the strengths and where are the weaknesses in their particular strategy and what are particular barriers to exploitation or sustainability. And of course, project funders. One of the important things funders want to understand is return on investment. Where are they going to get, and where did they make the right decisions about what projects were funded, and possibly where have they can it be seen they've made the wrong decisions on what projects should be funded? What should possibly not have been funded as well as much as it was? So it allows them to see their portfolio of funded and supported activities. So that brings me to the end of my introduction. So I'm going to open the floor to a couple of minutes of questions, if there are any, before we move on to the next section. Okay. In view that MTRL has been available for some time and used in multiple previous support actions, are there any success stories or case studies showing how MTRL has assisted EU-funded projects in achieving greater impact? Yes, we have a number. Oh, Julie's going to answer this question live, or okay. I was going to say, so yes, we have a number of different projects that have very specifically being able to show great success because of how the MTRL assessment has allowed them to understand where their particular strengths in their route to market has been achieved, and also where a particular weakness has. And I'll try and bring those to you. I'll bring at least one of those towards you towards the end of this event. Is that okay, Scott?
Do you have another question?
Yeah, how are you measuring return on investment? Is this purely a quantitative measure? Yes, this is what I would say is that in some ways that when I say about measuring return on investment directly, the aim would be to say that within a research and innovation action, then you are intending to develop a product or service as an outcome. And from that point of view, as a funder, from particularly the European Commission's point of view, you know, being able to show that actually that their projects are ready and able to launch into the market is a very important thing. Okay, right. I'm gonna move on now. If you don't mind, guys, I'm gonna move on to our next section. Right. So what is MTRL and an MTRL analysis? So a quick overview. I'm going to go through, you know, why we do that, why this is important. TRL, the technological readiness levels, market readiness levels, and then how we bring that together in MTRL itself, showing that the sum is greater than its parts. So what are our aims? Well, you know, we postulate that by adopting the MTRL framework, that research and innovation projects can bring a number of different benefits to them. You know, they can assess their own maturity within a group of or cluster of projects. We're targeting how, you know, project leaders can actually think about how they actually require support for particular exploitable outputs. They might realize early on that though a project was going to originally foresee to launch two or three products, that actually that due to the support required to actually launch a product properly to market, that may not be possible. We might want to be able to improve the quality and sustainability and exploitation of planning for launching to market. How do we actually highlight areas, if we don't have a way of measuring it, that actually need help and support? And, you know, from that point of view, you know, what we want to achieve and ensure doesn't happen, of course, is project failure. So actually, if an assessment is performed at a fairly regular basis, then actually we would see, or a project leader would see beforehand, whether or not they were going to get towards some form of issue well before that actually occurred. You know, overall, we provide decision makers with a very simple view of a project or product's maturity with this trackable single score, and we'll talk about how we track that later. And because this is a self-assessment type activity, then actually it's much faster than other tools or methodologies where you can need to bring in consultants or bring in external parties. This is something that can actually be done by the project itself quickly and easily. And, you know, they can think about doing this on a frequent basis. So, you know, what are the requirements behind this? Well, you know, we're often told that key measures of success for research and innovation projects are many and varied. You know, the one especially important ones that are heard of an awful lot are, of course, impact, and that's often impact outside of the project itself in any number of different domains, that they want to see exploitation, that they want to see reuse. And that's particularly, of course, why the idea around open software, open access are very much pushed as a good way forward. We are asked during our projects, of course, about sustainability and sustainability strategies. And as part of those, we want to see and want to have examples of reuse. And of course, I would say that MTRL is an example of the reuse of an output from one particular FP7 project originally to another H2020 project. And of course, you know, why do we get impact? Why does exploitation and reuse happen? Well, obviously, you know, what comes out from a particular project has to be fit for purpose. You know, it has to be actually at a particular point in its evolution where it's ready for exploitation outside of the particular project or domain that developed it in the first place. And of course, there has to be a maturity in the technology at an appropriate level to actually enable its reuse without enormous amounts of overhead in terms of support from the project that developed it in the first place. So the technical evaluation is, of course, then a key part of this. And to do this, we, like many others, have lent on the previously developed and well-known technical or technological readiness level activity. Defined by NASA in the 1980s, it's a measure of the technical maturity of a particular product, service, or capability. And the great thing is, of course, that it has a very, very defined range of what it's actually intending to measure, right from the point of fundamental research all the way through to operationally proven systems. And it is incredibly widely used, including by the H2020 program itself. You know, and here are the different, so the different definitions of technical readiness level. And you'll see there are 9 TRL levels, all the way through from basic principles observed and reported at TRL 1, right the way through to TRL 9, which, and this is the straight NASA version of TRL, to actual system flight proven through successful mission operations. Now, of course, you know, this is the original TRL list. And of course, these can be considered or viewed in a number of different ways for non-flight proven type products and services. And what we did within the CloudWatch activity, and I've lent on this here, is we had a bit of a rejig of how we define each of the different TRL levels. Right the way through from level 0 or level 1, from the basic research area, all the way through to level 9, the full commercial application. And you can see here that these have now been generalized somewhat so that they can be applied to many different areas, you know, right the way through. So basic, you know, describing the need, you know, for basic research, you know, technology formulation, you know, we've got a concept and a POC application's been formulated. We've got some type of initial offering for needs validation. You can see each of these areas works through. But what we decided also within that is that, you know, it'd be really good to have a different way of describing this at a much more granular level. And you can see on the right that we created four different supersets here, from idea, which describes anything that's TRL 3 and below, that's a prototype for TRL 4 and 5, that's in validation for TRL 6 and 7, and then is a production activity for TRLs 8 and 9. And, you know, from that point of view, simplifying TRLs does, you know, the idea of TRLs makes it easier to understand and much more applicable in a broader domain, as with things like, as you could imagine, with things like cybersecurity, with things like software, where we might be looking at any number of end user areas, or rather than a tightly focused thing like NASA does. Of course, once we have the technical evaluation done for a product or service, we need to then think about marketing, or its validity within the market. And as it says here, technically best products can still fail. The very broad, very widespread anecdote in this area, of course, is Betamax video versus VHS, which was a far better technology, but which was beaten by marketing by the proponents of VHS. And that really shows that actually, if you're bringing a product or service to market, that it is a very complex and difficult task that requires a broad number of different activities to actually all work in a coordinated manner. You need to approach this with the correct business strategy. You want to have an idea of the model of how your product or service is actually going to behave in the market, what you need to do to support it. You normally actually need to do some marketing. You need to do some showing to your prospective market of what your product or service actually is and how it's going to solve their problems. You, of course, need somebody to sell it, to actually push it into the market. And once something's there, it's got to be well supported. Many really great products have been launched to market with no support and have obviously and unsurprisingly at that point failed. Now, there are many ways that you can actually look at this idea of supporting a product into market through business planning and modeling. And this is a very well-known one, the business model canvas. And you can see here that it's a fairly complex piece of information that it's asking for to be completed. And actually, that's not even the most the completeness in that one thing. That actually, if you pull out the value propositions, customer relationship, customer segments and channels, then actually there is another canvas, the value proposition canvas, that's often used to get greater detail into particular parts of the business model as a whole. So we can see here that the traditional way of collecting and supporting that activity, a particular product or services outcome into business, is complex, and we want to simplify that. And so we looked at, and with support from an external consultant, Frank Bennett, who we work with within Cyberwatching, we looked at this idea of the 4 fits model for commercial operations. So this is a simplification of 4 different areas in which your product or service has to fit well for it to be launched into a market successfully. So we've got the problem fit solution. So does the problem exist? Can we solve it? Are we improving or creating new? So actually, do we understand what problem our product or service is actually supposed to solve? Or do we actually have that defined? The next one is the vision or team fit. Actually, do we have the right team to actually solve the problem? Do we have not just the technical or technology team, but do we have those others with experience relevant to business modeling, marketing, sales, to actually then successfully bring the product to market? Product to market fit, have we identified the target customer segment? Who are the people we're selling to? Who are the people we're taking our product or service to? And do we really understand them? And then finally, actually, once we've got our product, once we've answered the first 3 fits, actually, do we have this model for once we've launched into market for continuing exploitation and sustainability in the longer term? So all of these fits have to be answered. And that's a simplification, but it's still fairly complex. So from this, we developed this idea to match up with TRLs, the idea of marketing readiness levels. And you can see here that again there are 9 different MRLs that we have for a product or service, and they start off with level 0, the hunch. Somebody perceives a need within the market, and this we can do something. We again then launch into basic research. The ideas then develop further, need formulation, need validation. And then we get into this idea of actually beta testing, beta testing with a closed, friendly group of stakeholders, then larger groups of stakeholders. Then we get into the ideas of actually people that are willing to pay for things. So the MRL 6 proof of traction was sales match 100 paying customers. That showcases actually that we're solving the problem or solution fit. There was a problem that actually was required and that required a product to solve it. Proof of satisfaction. Well, actually, do you have happy customers? And that's this thing of the idea of this vision or team fit. Actually, do you have all the people within the team to actually ensure you have happy customers because you're supporting them well? The next one, proof of scalability. Can you actually scale up what you're doing, that you actually understand the market and you actually are able to make revenue projections of how you're going to grow the sales of your product or service? And then proof of stability. Actually, have you reached a sustainable activity? So combining those two, combining TRL, which you need a product that of course is ready technically for the market, and you need it to be supported by the MRL. And so we combine these two as the Market and Technology Readiness Level, and it's provided as a single value for the product or service that's being evaluated. So any questions at this point? I'm going to quickly move on if there aren't. Right, okay. So how to complete an MTRL self-assessment? Hello?
Apology. We have one question. Someone,
yeah.
Alan Lewis, raised his hand.
Oh, yes. Sorry, can you hear me okay?
Yes, I can, Alan.
Yeah, sorry, I raised my hand and then I lowered my hand because.
Oh, sorry.
But it's a quick question. I'm just wondering. You've got these 2 scales, technology readiness level and market readiness level, and you're combining them. And it seems a bit like you're taking the product life cycle and splitting it in 2 different directions. I'm just wondering how doing that aids viewing the delivery of the product as an encapsulation of both technical things and marketing things.
Well, it allows you, I suppose, in some ways to slightly separate the technical and market view, as you'll see later on. So where we talk about in this section, the self-assessment itself, that actually the different weightings that are applied to different measures of what are drivers of success, I suppose I would call them, in the areas of both technology and marketing. That actually, when we think about the different weighting that we would apply to different factors, we have to appropriately view and change them for both the domain that we're in, so in this case in software, and we'll have changed them from when we looked at this within specifically cybersecurity or cloud computing previously, but also the fact that we need to, and to go back to your very specific original question, we do need to have a slight separation because, particularly in the, at a startup type stage, somebody can have a fantastic product or service that won't reach any further because it doesn't have the appropriate business side to the exploitation that quality of product really would deserve. And so getting the idea that you can actually come out with a value, but the recommendation that you're giving is targeted towards a specific area of maybe weakness within the evaluation that could be thought of needing improvement. So though you get a single value, the recommendation that comes out of this can be targeted towards what is a weakness in a particular part of the MRL analysis. Okay.
Yeah, no, I can understand that. I'll just be interested to see how you do that combination then of the technical side of things and the marketing side of things in your leveling. Okay.
Right. Okay. So how to complete an MTRL self-assessment. And so why did we choose self-assessment? Well, the development of MTRL and the assessment methodology has been developed over what is now 6 and a bit years. And when we started off in the CloudWatch 2 project, we actually had the assessments completed by members of the CloudWatch 2 team in collaboration with the project. And these were part of the CW2 team were actually those that helped develop MTRL in the first place. It was a very manual process, and it required their skill to actually come up with how they would recognize in collaboration and in conversation with the project how the particular components in the MRL analysis particularly would actually be recognized, and that's not particularly useful when you're moving to particularly domains that can have much larger numbers of projects and products. So within cyber watching, well, we didn't have those expert reviewers as part of the project. And also we had very large numbers of projects that we wanted to evaluate. So we moved to this idea that we could actually create a tool to allow self-assessment by the projects themselves. And also, from our point of view, we were trying, this is a tool or service that then can be taken to different areas. And that's what we're going to be applying within SWForum.eu. So we've got a questionnaire. We've done this because, of course, it is much easier to reach and evaluate a very large number of projects by effectively sending out to those projects a copy of the questionnaire. It allows them also, though, to take a copy of that and actually keep it for repeat analysis. So they can actually then reevaluate themselves without needing to re-engage with the SWForum project each time that they want to do that. And it's a fairly quick analysis that they're actually going to be doing. It is completing a spreadsheet effectively. So what does our questionnaire actually collect? Well, the first thing is a number of pieces of general project information, the project name, type, name, website, partners, contact who's actually completing the analysis, and their authorizations to use the data from within now the SWForum.eu project. And then there are 9 substantive questions that are asked of the project, multiple choice questions, that the project is asked to complete, 2 of which, because of the fact that actually the TRL is a very well understood and a very well bounded problem, only 2 of the 9 questions are on TRL, project maturity and product development. The other 7 questions are focused on MRL, on marketing readiness levels, and that's the product definition or design, competitive landscape, the team, documentation, IP management, go-to-market, and supply chain. So these 7 areas that the project is asked to evaluate itself on in each of these different areas. And from that, we make an automated calculation of the individual TRL that applies, the MRL that applies, and the combination MTRL. So for the project maturity question, for each question, there are 5 possible answers, and the project is asked to actually select which of those 5 are most applicable to its current status. And you can see here that, so we have 5 different steps that a project can be in its own maturity. You know, and it's all the way from, you know, that we are beyond basic research, you know, but we've got no experimental proof, all the way up through different stages to, you know, finally to integrated product demonstrating performance in the intended environment. A very large scale prototype would be, you know, that's the sort of what we would imagining for a research and innovation action. That's the sort of ultimate thing that they are trying to achieve as a project. For product development, you know, well, you know, we've got the lowest level is that there's, you know, an initial product and its market fit has been defined, all the way up through, again, through different scales of development, you know, demonstration of a full-scale product prototype, manufacturing issues solved, first commercial product or service, all the way to a product or service is available for all consumers, that it's a generally available output. So those were the 2 TRL questions. Then we move on. So product definition and design. Well, that's, you know, and this is in the MRL area. And we start off at the low level of, you know, 1 or more initial product hypotheses have been defined, you know, actually why the product is there, why the product is needed, and why it's to be designed, all the way through to, you know, the product, there is a final design, it's optimized, it's got to be certified, but, you know, it's actually taken on board detailed customer and product requirements. You know, so we've got the product design is done, and it's been done for a number of well-documented reasons that are connected with customer requirements. You know, competitive landscape. Well, you know, launching a project or product into the market, it's always important to understand what the possible competition is. Where is this product actually going to be? And does it actually launch itself, for example, into an area of market where you might have 10 or 20 different competitors, where it'd be incredibly difficult to show differentiation? You know, so showing that the product owners, the project management have actually got an understanding of where they're launching themselves. And from a research and innovation action point of view, this could be thought of in many ways as, you know, you've done a full literature search and you know what else is happening in the domain that you're working in. So team here to me is the one area I'm still personally in the process of tuning for how it actually relates to research innovation action, specifically in software where we're talking about open source. Is, you know, we start off, well, there's no team or organization, there's a single person, no legal entity, all the way through to balance teams with all of the capabilities. Remember I said earlier that we need to be thinking about business modeling, to be thinking about sales, marketing, support. Well, you know, the top level for team, of course, is that all of those areas are covered. And that's a capability. It doesn't mean that you necessarily need individuals in every single one area, one person per area, but the team as a whole needs those capabilities to be actually available to them. Documentation, and everyone that's done anything in terms of reusing of any product or services will always say that the very most important thing is you must have documentation. That, you know, it goes beyond technical descriptions all the way through actually to white papers on how a product is used within a particular domain, service or area. That there might be demo resources, that we would like marketing documentation, and that's the top level, that we've gone all the way through the different layers of the documentation stack so that you could, as somebody that wants to come and reuse these tools and technologies, can actually do so as quickly and easily as possible. IPR, and as anyone within an R&I action will know when you're dealing with the consortium agreement, that IPR management is actually incredibly important. Even within the areas of open source, where we're dealing with different licensing with open source and open access, it is very important. And an IP here might actually be that you've associated the correct Creative Commons license with a particular output, that you're using the right open source software license, so that attribution is correctly, that it is correctly being recorded. So from that point of view, making sure that the project has actually worked with the IP as much as possible, and has a clear description of how that's going to be applied. Then go to market. Well, what's the business model and what's the value proposition? And actually, have we worked all the way through that market and customer needs, partnerships with key stakeholders at the higher end here, all the way through to actually, our business relationships established with suppliers and partners, and actually have customers given purchase orders for having bought some example of the product or service you're trying, or the open source equivalent. Have you got somebody using it, and are they actually attributing the fact they've used it appropriately within their own area? And then finally, well, actually the manufacturing or the supply chain, have you established how any dependencies that your product or service has are actually well mapped out? And within software, of course, this can be dependent libraries, where if you're not careful, you could get into scenarios where you're building software on libraries that suddenly become unsupported, which can have catastrophic effects if, for example, they remove support for a particular platform you're building on and things like that. And have you actually worked through the relationship so that you understand all the dependencies for the particular product or service that you're creating? So how do we actually analyze and take the answers from our questions actually into values of TRL and MRL? And so this is how we take the outputs from the first two questions and give it a TRL score. And you can see here that what we're talking about here is the answers to the two questions are in combination. So the first one is actually that the TRL is established in two ways. If the answer, it's either the straight answer to question one in terms of answer 1 to 5, if the answer for question 2 is 1. If the answer to question 2 is greater than 1, by implication, the level for question 1 will be 5, and therefore the TRL matches the answer to question 2 plus a score of 4. So that's how we pull out the TRL, and we've modeled this in a number of different areas and believe this to be accurate. So how do we actually then turn about the answers to the 7 other questions into our marketing readiness level score? Well, as I mentioned earlier, that the answers to different questions have different weightings. So though each of these areas are important, some areas are viewed as more important than others. And you can see here, for example, that team is considered one of the most important areas. And that's particularly because if you don't have the expertise in the areas, particularly outside maybe the core technical competency needed to build the product in the first place, then you're unlikely to be able to correctly assess all of the other areas and the areas that are needed to actually create the business domain, business landscape that you're needing to understand to pull your product into market. So the MRL score is created by the sum of the answers to each of the 7 questions times their weighting times 9, divided by the sum of the maximum possible answers that you can give. The aim here, the times by 9, is because we have 9 levels of MRL, and the other is a ratio of the possible answer against the answer given times its weighting times the possible maximum score. And that gives you your MRL. Now, as I mentioned, the outcome for MTRL is actually as a product of MRL versus TRL. And we've done that within SWForum because we want to recognize that the equal contribution. Previously, we've looked at different weightings between MRL and TRL, purely because that some of these domains have been much more, it's been much more important on the marketing or the market readiness level than TRL. But we don't believe within software and within the software area that we're looking at within SWForum that that's the case. The graphic here shows actually that we've been looking at really what are acceptable scores or likely scores to actually achieve a transition of a product or service to market. And we have, sort of not acceptable, moderately, could do with more work, and successful for the 3 bands that are available in TRL and MRL and where their products lie. So any questions on this area on actually how we create the MTRL value itself? I don't think so, and I know we're running slightly behind, and I apologize, I've maybe talked a little slower than I should. I'll move on to the final area now on visualization of MTRL results. Oh, there is a question. How did you define the weights for the different categories? This was done empirically by considering whilst working with the experts particularly in the area of business readiness, how the different importance of the different areas for each of the questions are actually the answer to the different questions are related. Yes, Alan, we can give you the slides and there'll be a recording of the rest of this. Right, okay, so visualizing MTRL results. The aim, of course, as I mentioned earlier, is about providing this simple method which the product or project view the MTRL assessment results, with a couple of suggestions about possible next steps. So the output from the self-assessment spreadsheet at the bottom, once you've completed the questions, looks like this. You've got the calculated values of TRL, MRL, and MTRL, given just as a straight score. We've got a graphical representation that can show where this particular project, where your assessment sits within the landscape as a whole, to see whether you're favoring one side or the other, so particularly MRL or TRL. And we have then a couple of simple recommendations, one for MRL and one for TRL, that depend on your score of what they're particularly suggesting that you could actually improve. And the second one is the MRL, and you could see here in the example, that actually they gave a very low score for the final question on manufacturing and supply chain, and the algorithm that runs in the background that does the analysis recognizes this and suggested that the project is not ready, not marketable yet. It's got a reasonably long way to go with an MRL of only 3, And one of the key things that they could start improving was their manufacturing and supply chain, because they gave a very low answer to that question. So that's what you get straight out of the self-assessment spreadsheet itself. Now, of course, one of the things that we want to be able to do is understand, once a project has actually completed an assessment, well, where it is at the moment, and well, actually, where could it go with a change or reaction to recommendations that it's been given. So the idea behind this floss is to show that, well, okay, you get this current score, but with one or two simple changes, where could you see a future score? Where could you actually move with a simple change within one or two areas to show a change from MRL and TRL? So that's another visualization. So that's about assessing possible future progress against where a project is at the moment. I mentioned earlier this idea that, well, you know, we've got these simplified scales for MRL and TRL. And one of the things that we've been actually doing, and this is coming back to what I mentioned earlier about the Software Forum Technology Radar, is this idea of then plotting in a relative manner the results of an MTRL analysis against other projects. Because, of course, many times when somebody is searching for something to a product or service, there's quite often more than one product or service in this area that they're trying to look at, and they like to see and be able to compare simply, quickly, and easily against other possible competing activities. So I mentioned the idea that in TRL we separate down to idea, prototype, validation, and production, and we've aligned this with different areas within the technology radar for the different scores. And we've done the same for MRL, where we had, of course, ideation, testing, traction, and scaling, and we've given these a preparation level. You know, insufficiently prepared, poorly prepared, fairly prepared, and greatly prepared. And what we're able to do with that then is actually give a color coding to that you can then utilize within, by linking visualization technologies together within the product, within the technology radar that's showcased here, with the three different high-level domains in which software tools are, we've divided software tools to be. And we can see that there are example projects here. These are hypothetical examples where we've actually done some evaluation. They've had their MTRL assessment and they're plotting them onto their values within the radar. We can see that there are within different areas. So within tools and techniques, there are two projects which are in adopt, which means they have a high TRL level. But we can see that there are two projects here. One is greatly prepared from a marketing point of view, and one is poorly prepared, which allows people that are viewing this to say, oh, well, I'm likely to go for project 5 here, because I will have greater confidence in being able to utilize that output for a longer term, and it's likely to be of higher quality. And we can see that for all of the different projects that are actually projected onto the radar here, where their MRL and their TRL is actually within this display. So what's next, just to finish off for everyone? Well, you know, what's next for you and MTRL? What we'd like you to do is to contact SWForum.eu to request a copy of the self-evaluation questionnaire. If you then complete the self-evaluation questionnaire and send it and return that to us, we will arrange a meeting to talk through the results with the Software Forum team, discuss those results and available support from within the Software Forum project for your product or output. And then, of course, to use this as a way to engage with the broader SWForum.eu community. So thank you very much. And any questions on this last section or overall? Archie. And I've got a question. For an area, we're often targeting greenfield technology opportunities. We're often no current competitors and are targeting markets that need to be created. Don't we need a separate MTRL for an RAA and IA projects? Well, so it can not necessarily, because one of the things, of course, here, Scott, is that you may have an expectation of a targeted MRL and TRL that you would expect to get to, and then you can measure and evaluate yourself against where you are in that sub-range. Because, of course, you know, we would say that, you know, the innovation part of the RAA still is aiming to create products and services as outcomes, and the market, it would be the market would actually be, you know, one that you'd be aiming to create. So by evaluating and creating a market, you are then showing strength in that, and because there are no competitors, you've actually have evaluated that there are no competitors, so you know where you are sitting within that market. How to adapt this when your assets are open source focused? There's no specific there's no specific need to have any particular difference between open source or closed source. In some ways, that, you know, from my point of view, this is equally applicable in both areas. The only one that I would say is you wouldn't be sales per se, but it would be documented reuses, and because, of course, in an open source environment, you would expect attribution to be given back to you. And from that point of view, you could then take that as sales. So Zhao, is the SWForum MTRL methodology now final, or is it still under development? The weightings and possible wording are still slightly under development. The idea but the idea about how we use this to try and evaluate it will be itself evaluated throughout the lifetime of the SWForum project. You know, if we find that there's a way to alter these weightings and alter the methodology, the mechanism by which we create the final MTRL value, then we can change that. But the aim is to be really slightly flexible, but to allow different. Once we are starting to see projects into the radar with their MTRL evaluations, we'd like them to stay fairly static in terms of previous evaluations, so particularly for themselves, so that they can well understand any transition between previous assessment and a reassessment. Peter, how do you see the use of MRL for new technologies like next generation internet, ledger and blockchain? Well, next generation internet, ledger and blockchain, for example, are solving a problem. They wouldn't have been developed as an activity or as a product or service if they weren't. So I think we can very much say that actually, you know, the MRL methodology fits for new technologies just as well as it would for older technologies. From my point of view, actually, new technologies that are just arriving on the block need an MRL assessment, possibly even more than old technologies, which may have market history to be able to actually build up on, to understand how they might actually move into what might be a fairly crowded market. Next generation or new technologies, well, do they actually have a reason of why they're there? And how do you decide the angle of where to place projects in the radial radar visualization? So the aim here, and this is one of the reasons why we've actually only done 3 segments here, is because each segment is divided into 3, where each project can be associated with the segment that it's in and one of the other segments, so a leading segment and a lagging segment, so that if it's nearer to the dotted lines, it's a project that's in that segment, but it's nearer to the other segment, the other side of the dotted line. And finally, right, okay, and so to finish up, one of the things that I'd like to say actually is that this is the first in a series of webinars for MTRL. We will be having another 3 webinars, understanding criteria for optimal self-assessment, so supporting projects through actually completing a self-assessment in August, understanding your feedback, and then in December, and then using MTRL self-assessments to understand project trajectory in March next year. I'd like to say thank you very much to you all, and please do feel free. I'm a fairly easy to find person on the internet. Do feel free, if you desire, to drop me an email if you have any further questions. So thank you very much, everyone, and thank you very much for your participation in today's webinar.